The Carcharodon Astra, also known as the Space Sharks, are a loyalist chapter of the Adeptus Astartes created during an unknown founding. While the exact founding of the chapter is unknown, the Carcharodons have been documented as existing as far back as M32, where they fought during the conflict known as the Astropath Wars. Over the course of their existence, the Carcharodons have gained notoriety for their sheer savagery and brutality, which is considered by a number of Imperial authorities to be excessive, even when compared to other equally vicious Space Marine chapters, such as the Flesh Tearers or Executioners. This ferociousness is reflected within the chapter's battlefield doctrine, with the Carcharodons favouring shock assault and tearing their foes apart in melee combat. Should their foe prove exceptionally stubborn or resistant, then the chapter will swiftly withdraw before launching another violent assault against the enemy's flank or rear. Such is the brutality and ruthlessness of the Carcharodons in battle that it has been known for the chapter's allies to suffer from collateral damage. This was most notably demonstrated during the course of the Badab War, with the assault on Badab Primaris, where the Carcharodons were ordered to target the planet's infrastructure, while the Star Phantoms launched a simultaneous assault against the renegade Astral Claws chapter. The Carcharodons would choose to interpret their orders with their typical brutal efficiency, sabotaging a number of Hive City reactor cores, causing them to overload. While the way that the Carcharodons interpreted and carried out their orders were undeniably effective, their actions resulted in the deaths of hundreds of their Star Phantom allies. The Star Phantoms have never forgiven the Carcharodons for their callousness, and continue to harbour a deep resentment towards the chapter even to this day. Little is known about the origins of the Carcharodons, with many external records regarding the chapter becoming fragmented and lost, although the Carcharodons themselves claim to be fully aware of their history. Despite this, some hints to their origins remain. The tome known as the Mythos Angelica Mortis details an event known as the Day of Exile, where the founders of the Carcharodons, known to the chapter as the Wandering Ancestors, were ordered to journey to the very edge of the galaxy, where they would be tasked with hunting down and slaying Xenos, traitors, and renegades in order to atone for some unknown transgression. During the chapter's journeys throughout the Outer Dark, the Carcharodons have recovered numerous examples of ancient technologies known as Archaeotech. This is then traded with the Adeptus Mechanicus, who in exchange provide the chapter fresh supplies of materiel, such as armor, vehicles, and ammunition. These trades conducted with the Mechanicus are known to the chapter as Grey Tithes. Despite this supply of goods from the Adeptus Mechanicus, much of the chapter's equipment is incredibly old, with many examples of which having been extensively modified in order to keep it serviceable. The Carcharodons are also somewhat unique for a loyalist Space Marine chapter for their methods of acquiring new aspirants, for instead of forcing volunteer aspirants to undertake trials in order to prove their worth, the Carcharodons will conduct swift and bloody slave raids known as Red Tithes. The strongest and most promising of these slaves will be inducted into the chapter, while the rest will serve the Carcharodons as slave serfs. Since many of the chapter's records have been lost to the annals of history, including that of their primogenitor Primarch, then which of the first founding legions could the Carcharodons be descended from? While the source of the chapter's gene seed is officially unknown, the genetic stock of the Carcharodons is noted to display a number of flaws. The first of these, which appears to be a flaw unique to the chapter, is that as the warriors of the chapter age, their skin starts to take on a rough sandpaper texture, with dark grey denticle-like growths similar to that of shark skin manifesting across their flesh. The other notable traits found within Carcharodon gene seed is that of a speculated flaw within their melanchromic organ, resulting in the chapter's battle brothers developing deathly pale skin and eyes that are an oily black in colour. These latter two traits are characteristic of two of the original Space Marine legions. The first and most likely of these potential primogenitors to the modern-day Carcharodon chapter is that of the 19th Legion of the Legione Astartes, the Raven Guard. Like the Carcharodons, the gene seed of the Raven Guard causes those that are implanted with it to develop pale skin and black eyes as a result of the deficiencies found within their melanchromic organ. While the battlefield tactics and doctrine of the Raven Guard may initially appear to be at odds with those of the Carcharodons, there are a number of links that connect these two chapters. For starters, the current chief librarian of the Carcharodons, T. Kahurangi, is known by the title of Pale Nomad. The term Pale Nomad, according to Horus Heresy Book 3, Extermination, was one of the titles bestowed to the original Raven Guard Legion by the Lunar Wolves, prior to the Legion's reunion with their Primarch, Corvus Corax. The brutal and callous nature of the Carcharodons is also similar to that of a chapter from the original Raven Guard Legion during the time of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, the Ashen Claws. The Ashen Claws were a chapter comprised predominantly of Terran-born Astartes, who, much like the Carcharodons, were notorious for not only their brutality, but also for their casual disregard for casualties. The chapter would frequently utilize sacrificial units in battle in order to distract their enemy, while the bulk of their forces would strike hard at the enemy's flank or rear to deliver the killing blow. In addition, much like the modern-day Carcharodons, the Ashen Claws were known for conducting slave raids to bolster the ranks of their serfs, which would eventually put them at odds with their Primarch, who vehemently opposed such actions. The Ashen Claws, along with many other Terran elements of the Raven Guard, would ultimately be exiled by their Primarch in order to remove the more undesirable elements of the Legion that would be unable to adapt to Corax's vision as to what the Raven Guard should be. This act would anger the Ashen Claws, as their centuries of loyal service was effectively being punished instead of rewarded. The chapter would then be forced to journey towards the region of space known as the Ghoul Stars, and while the Ashen Claws sided with neither loyalist nor traitor forces during the course of the Horus Heresy, the chapter would still leave its mark during the conflict, as they conducted numerous raids upon the Nostromo sector. The Ashen Claws continue to endure even to this day, acting as little more than pirates and brigands, serving no master but themselves, but have been known to trade with the Carcharodons on occasion. Given their genetic similarities, doctrine, and battlefield tactics, it's plausible to assume that the Carcharodons are themselves descended from this particular division of the original Raven Guard Legion. This possibility is further supported by a number of additional links. The first of which is detailed within the novel Red Tithe, with the following passage stating that the ancestors of the Carcharodons were exiled for some unknown transgression.
They were dispatched into the outer darkness upon that first day of exile, there to ravage the foes of mankind until their final atonement. Their Forgotten One gave them remit unbound to set about the traitor, the alien and the renegade, without mercy, and to harrow them in their places of strength. So began their long hunt. They hunt still.
There is also the fact that many suits of armor within the possession of the Carcharodons, in addition to their heraldry and numerous battle scars, are covered in what are known as exile markings, presumably in reference to the Ashen Claws and their exile by Corvus Corax. In addition, many suits of armor within the chapter's armory are incredibly ancient, with some even dating back to the Terran Unification Wars. Some of these suits of armor are even decorated with the original sigil of the Emperor, lightning bolts, and the right to bear this imagery was said to be the first battle honor earned by the chapter. Because the ancestors of the Carcharodons are implied to be directly descended from a chapter that fought upon Terra itself, this only strengthens the possibility that the Carcharodons could be descended from the Ashen Claws, who, as stated earlier, were mostly Terran-born Raven Guard. Another piece of evidence to support this possibility is that the chapter master of the Carcharodons, Tyberos the Red Wake, is also known by the title of Shade Lord. During the course of the Great Crusade, the title of Shade Lord was used almost exclusively by a figure known as Arcus Fowl, who was the original commander of the Ashen Claws. The novel Outer Dark even suggests that a figure revered by the Carcharodons known as the Forgotten One, who is regarded to be the father of the chapter, was in fact Arcus Fowl. When a contingent of Carcharodons met with a modern-day incarnation of the Ashen Claws in order to barter for materiel, both chapters would refer to this mysterious figure, with the Carcharodons claiming to be sons of the Forgotten One, and the Ashen Claws, somewhat ironically, stating that they have not forgotten the Forgotten One and continue to serve him to this day. In addition, the signature weapons of Tyberos, a pair of gauntlets named Hunger and Slake that incorporate both chain blades and lightning claws, are said to be relics that were supposedly stolen from the Ashen Claws, further strengthening this connection. There is also the fact that the Carcharodons maintain limited stocks of Raven Guard genetic material, which the chapter has been known to trade with the Ashen Claws, further supporting the links between the two. While the evidence to support the possibility of the Carcharodons being a Raven Guard successor chapter appears to be overwhelming, there is still a minute possibility that the chapter is descended from another legion entirely. As such, could it be possible that the Carcharodons are, in actuality, descended from the 8th Legion of the Legione Astartes, the Night Lords? While this may appear to be somewhat unlikely, there is a fair amount of circumstantial evidence connecting the Carcharodons with the Night Lords Legion. The first of these potential links is once again due to a number of similar, if not outright identical, genetic traits. The gene seed of the Night Lords, despite being considered relatively pure, imbues those implanted with it with pale skin and black eyes, which, as stated earlier, are traits found within the Carcharodons' own gene seed. This similarity is even detailed within the novel Red Tithe, as the Night Lord Aemon Cull remarked that the Carcharodons bore a curious resemblance to the Night Lords. Not only this, but Cull himself would note that the way the Carcharodons fought upon the battlefield was eerily similar to the Night Lords, as detailed with the following passage.
Their fighting style was not one Cull recognized. If anything, it seemed eerily like the Night Lord's own doctrines. The Brethren of the Red Knights, a young successor to the Blood Angels, had displayed a violent savagery when Cull had engaged them in orbit above Quills, and he had heard of the brutality of the Space Wolves. These grey-clad loyalists matched the bloodthirsty violence of both chapters, and yet there were unsettling differences.
In addition, the demon Bargul would further reinforce the potential genetic links between the Night Lords and the Carcharodons. When the Night Lords launched their raid upon the world of Zartak, Bargul would warn the Night Lord sorcerer Shadraith of the imminent arrival of the Carcharodons, referring to the Loyalist chapter with the following quote:
"The hunters in the void, your lost brothers."
Now, while it is admittedly possible that the demon could have simply used the term brothers in order to refer to the Carcharodons as merely being fellow space marines, the term brother is commonly used within the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes in order to describe warriors who share the same genetic heritage, regardless of their chapter. For example, an Imperial Fist and a Black Templar would be regarded as being brothers, for they both share the gene seed of Rogel Dawn. By contrast, an Imperial Fist and a Blood Angel would see one another as cousins, due to having different gene fathers. One of the final pieces of potential supporting evidence that suggests a genetic link between the Carcharodons and the Night Lords comes from the novel Outer Dark. When Baal Shah, the Reaper Prime of the Carcharodons, met with Nehat Nev, the chapter master of the Ashen Claws, within the feasting hall of the Lost Eyrie, one of Nev's warriors refers to Baelshar specifically as being traitor-born scum. Admittedly, it is arguable that this term could have been referring to something else entirely, such as by declaring that the Carcharodons had betrayed the original ideals of the Ashen Claws, or simply uttered as a generic insult, as opposed to claiming that the Carcharodons are truly descended from a traitor legion. Some have even suggested that the mysterious forgotten one of the Carcharodons was none other than Sevatar, the first captain of the Night Lord's Legion during the time of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. One of the last documented accounts in regards to Sevatar's whereabouts was during the later years of the Horus Heresy, following the events of the Thramas Crusade, with Sevatar being captured and incarcerated by the loyalist Dark Angels Legion. During his time in captivity, Sevatar would, somewhat begrudgingly, befriend a young astropath named Altani. After being caught utilizing her psychic talents to converse with Sevatar, Altani would be viciously beaten for 7 days and nights by the overseer of her astropathic choir, which would result in the young girl being crippled. After learning of her fate, Sevatar sought to avenge the young astropath. Sevatar would succeed in escaping from his jailers as he was being escorted to a prison transport vessel, before tracking down Altani's overseer. Sevatar would garrote the overseer with his own power lash before eventually snapping his neck. When the Dark Angels finally made it to the choir chamber, Sevatar would declare that he was both justice and punishment, before offering his unconditional surrender. After being returned to his cell, Sevatar would ponder the possibility of hunting down humanity's true enemies, as detailed with the following passage from the short story The Long Night.
He sits alone in the blackened stillness, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. A sense of serenity cloaks him, and a feeling of cold focus that has eluded him for decades. When he dreams now, it is not of the dead, but of the endless night between worlds, the deepest void where 1,000 threats drift, away from the light of loyal suns, the domains of aliens and monsters forced into exile by the Great Crusade, still crying out to be extinguished once and for all, the true threats to mankind.
These dreams of hunting the enemies of man in the deepest, darkest reaches of space are similar to the eternal mission undertaken by the modern-day Carcharodons, as the chapter prowls the very edge of the galaxy in order to hunt down and eliminate the enemies of man. Another possibility in regards to the genetic heritage of the Carcharodons, however, is that their gene seed is actually chimeric in nature. This is due to the fact that the Ashen Claws have been documented as regularly referring to the Carcharodons as mongrels, suggesting that their gene seed has been spliced together from at least 2 differing sources. When Baelshar is forced to compete within a pit fight against a captured berserker from the World Eater's traitor legion, Nev would remark that the World Eater could potentially be a brother to the Carcharodon. Admittedly though, Nev could have been simply taunting the Carcharodon or referring to the savagery of both the World Eaters and Carcharodons in combat. The idea that the gene seed of the Carcharodons could be chimeric in nature is also further supported, albeit somewhat loosely, by the fact that when the Carcharodons provided the Ashen Claws with a fresh supply of Ravenguard gene seed, Nev would inquire if the gene seed was pure or if it had been contaminated with the Carcharodons' own genetic material. This would seem to imply that the gene seed of the Carcharodons could be a hybridized mix, not only consisting of Ravenguard genetic stock, but possibly spliced with Night Lord, World Eater, or perhaps some other source entirely. But the final possibility is one that admittedly would appear to be the least likely. The book Deathwatch Honor the Chapter states, somewhat bizarrely, that the Carcharodons are a 3rd generation successor chapter of the Ultramarines, being direct descendants of the Eagle Warriors chapter. Despite this, the book still claims that the source of the chapter's gene seed is unknown, suggesting that this classification is somewhat erroneous, especially when taking into account that this book also declares that the Carcharodons were created during the 23rd founding, despite the chapter being active long before this particular period of time. Whatever the truth of the matter, the Carcharodons will still be regarded as one of the most brutal and vicious of all Space Marine chapters, and as long as the Carcharodons continue to exist, the enemies of man will have much to fear. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.